Most of such videos begin the same way: an ordinary road, an ordinary speed, an ordinary day. And then something appears in the frame that should not be there. A person in the middle of the lane, a living wall of insects, a car flying directly head-on, or the moment when it becomes too late to fix anything. Today on TopFacts, a compilation of the most creepy and disturbing recordings from dashcams. And closer to the end, stories await you that are already hard to call simply scary. There will be 3 levels, each of which is more tense than the previous one. And please understand us correctly, due to YouTube rules, many moments will be reworked to a very bad quality and to some extent completely censored, because otherwise this video will not be able to exist. Watch until the very end. Level 1. When strangeness can still be confused with absurdity. The woman who faked a runover. Sometimes the most disturbing frame is not an accident, but someone else's behavior. A car is calmly driving in its lane, and suddenly right in front stands a woman. This moment alone already looks wrong. A person is simply located in the middle of the road as if it were the most normal place in the world. The driver steers to the side to bypass her, and then something absolutely wild happens. The woman throws herself as if she had just fallen under a car. But the strangest part begins next. Literally seconds later, she is back on her feet. No shock, no falling to the side, no attempt to save herself. Instead, blows with her palms on the hood, shouts, sharp gestures, aggression, and some completely unnatural persistence. From the outside, it looks like a mixture of hysteria, pressure, and acting. And it is so raw that it becomes scary, not even because of the scene itself, but because of the thought. What would have happened without a dashcam? Because in such episodes, the threat is not only physical. Sometimes the danger is the very fact that you can be dragged into someone else's scenario, where the truth without a camera no longer means anything. The deer that pierced a bus. A public bus was walking along its route with passengers, and it was the most ordinary working trip. That is exactly why what follows is perceived so shockingly. From a side street, a deer suddenly flew out and at full speed crashed right into the windshield. The impact was so powerful that the animal literally pierced the front part, and shards and body mass flew inside the cabin. Passengers, who just a second ago were simply riding about their business, in a single instant found themselves inside a chaos of glass, screaming and impact. Such moments are especially scary because they come from entirely the wrong direction from where they are expected. Not the oncoming lane, not a red light, not a loss of control. Simply a living creature that bursts into the trajectory of a large transport and turns routine into a nightmare. Not a deer, a bear out of the darkness. When people talk about animals on the road, most immediately imagine a deer. But one driver encountered a much harsher version of this scenario. He was driving, talking, and everything looked absolutely ordinary, until a massive silhouette appeared out of the darkness. The impact was so strong that the beast was thrown across the asphalt far to the side. For a second, it seems that after such a thing, one does not get up. But then, the recording becomes almost surreal. The bear nevertheless gets up and walks away into the forest, as if even after such a collision, the road was only a short hindrance for him. In this episode, it is not only the force of the impact that scares. The destruction of the illusion of control scares. A person in a car gets used to thinking that he is in a safety capsule. Metal, glass, speed, technology. But one sudden appearance of a wild beast erases this feeling completely. You understand that at some point you intersect not with an obstacle, but with another reality, living, strong, and absolutely indifferent to human traffic rules. The chase that turned into a battle on wheels. The police finally pinned a stolen pickup truck from 2 sides. It seemed like everything was over. The finale. The officer stepped out, weapons ready, distance minimal. The car would no longer get away. But the driver decided that he would punch his way through to the very end. He reversed, and then sharply rushed forward directly at the police officers and official vehicles. The night at this moment literally burst into flames. Such footage holds you very tightly because there is no safe distance here. between the viewer and the danger. The car ceases to be just a means of escape and turns into a weapon. And from then on, everything is decided no longer by the rules of arrest, but by a pure fight for seconds. Even after the ramming and the gunshots, the driver continued to resist, as if he had definitively stepped beyond the bounds of common sense. And that is the horror of the scene. Sometimes a person behind the wheel becomes more dangerous than any armed conflict simply because he has speed, mass, and a complete absence of brakes in his head. The swarm of locusts that covered the sky. At first, it seems like a trifle. A couple of hits on the glass, a few insects, nothing special. The driver is driving along the road, it is light around, an ordinary day, a familiar landscape. But then these hits become more numerous, even more. And literally, in a matter of seconds, the entire space ahead begins to darken. This is not rain, not dust, not smoke. This is a swarm of locusts. A huge living mass flies right at the car, beats against the glass, turns the view into a murky chaos, and makes the landscape ahead almost unrecognizable. The most unpleasant thing in such a video is not even the scale itself, but how quickly the familiar picture of the world breaks down. Just a second ago, you were on the road. Now you are as if driving through a natural anomaly. Such footage reminds us that nature is not obligated to be beautiful, understandable, or convenient. Sometimes it simply comes as a huge, noisy, living wave. And all that remains for a person is to hold the steering wheel and hope that behind this moving wall, there is still a road. The car that flew up and almost flew into another driver. There are episodes where the word accident sounds too soft, because this is no longer a collision, but almost a scene from a nightmare. One driver is calmly driving along the highway when a car in the oncoming lane crashes into the divider. In normal logic, what should follow is a skid, a spin, or an impact into the barrier. But instead, the automobile literally takes off. Yes, exactly takes off, and flies straight towards another driver. It happens so fast that the brain does not have time to process the picture. The road, which a second ago was empty and predictable, suddenly turns into a space where an entire car is coming at you from above. Not metaphorically. For real. Mere counted meters save them. Such recordings very well knock out the feeling of control, because you can drive carefully, not break the rules, keep your distance, be focused, and still find yourself one movement away from death, which was not brought by you. Texting while driving. That ended exactly as it should have. There are videos where it is scary because of the chaos, and there are those where it is scary because of someone else's overconfidence. A young woman is driving a car and looking not at the road, but into her phone. This is already bad. But then, she removes one hand from the steering wheel, then the second. And now it already seems that she is texting with the relaxation with which people usually reply to messages at home, and not at speed on the road. Second by second, the video becomes more and more irritating and frightening, because the viewer sees the obvious outcome long before the driver understands it. The car gradually leaves the trajectory, and when the woman finally realizes what is happening, there is nothing left to fix. All that remains is a scream, an impact, and the instantaneous collapse of that overconfidence with which she held the phone with two hands a second ago. Such recordings are especially unpleasant, because there is neither a fatal accident, nor the elements, nor an attack in them. Only banal stupidity, which too often assumes that nothing will happen to me. A nighttime ambush on an empty road. A night driver noticed a strange picture ahead. It was as if a person was lying on the road, alongside movements that looked like an attempt to stop a car. For a normal person, the first impulse here is very dangerous: to help. It was precisely on this, judging by everything, that the calculation was made. When the automobile got closer, it became clear that this was not a request for help, but a trap. And then other figures began to emerge from the darkness, and exactly at this moment, the recording ceases to be just disturbing and becomes truly scary. Because what begins next is no longer a road story, but a story about survival. Only a lightning-fast reaction saved him. The driver did not stop, did not play the hero, and immediately began to reverse away. And this is one of those rare cases where suspiciousness turned out to be the right thing rather than nobility. An ice slab from the roof of a truck. Sometimes neither a criminal nor a reckless driver nor bad weather is needed for a disaster. Someone else's negligence is enough. A woman was driving along the highway next to a truck when a large layer of ice broke loose from its roof. It did not just slide down, it flew into the windshield with such force as if a concrete slab had been thrown into the car. The glass shattered, visibility disappeared, the dashcam was torn off, and in a fraction of a second, an ordinary trip home turned into a nightmare in which you are still alive, but can almost see nothing anymore. The most impressive thing here is the female driver's reaction. In such a situation, many would have simply lost control, but she managed to keep the automobile steady and stop safely. Such stories are remembered especially strongly because of their monstrous injustice. You broke no rules, did not exceed the speed limit, did not argue with the road. You were just driving about your business, and then ice flies at you from someone else's car, and all your safety turns out to be at the distance of one impact. The strange man who later ended up in the news. Sometimes a recording becomes creepy, not at the moment of viewing, but later when you learn the context. A police officer was processing a minor traffic accident in a parking lot, and one of the participants acted strangely from the very beginning. He was nervous, asked ridiculous questions, returned to the conversation, did not leave, lingered in the frame longer than necessary, held the other person by the hand for too long when saying goodbye. If you watch this without the backstory, you might think that we simply have a very nervous and clumsy man in front of us. But just a few days later, his face ended up in the news for a monstrous reason. And right then, every pause of his, every word, every awkward detail begins to be perceived completely differently. An overtaking in a downpour that crippled another person. Bad weather does not automatically make everyone more careful. Sometimes it only more vividly shows someone else's overconfidence. A female motorcyclist was riding in heavy rain. Visibility was poor. Her helmet and visor were constantly flooded with water. The road forgave no mistakes. But instead of slowing down the pace and admitting the obvious, she continued to ride aggressively, as if nature itself had no right to place limitations on her. And then, at some point, this feeling of control turned into an illusion. She went for a dangerous maneuver without having sufficient visibility and literally jumped onto the trajectory of another motorcyclist. The collision turned out to be catastrophic. The hardest thing in this story is not even the moment of impact itself, but the consequences. A person who absolutely should not have had to pay for someone else's overconfidence received an injury that changed his entire life. Very often, one person risks another's fate. Level 2. Now, it will not be scary, but truly creepy. The highway that collected 100 cars. One of the most frightening types of road recordings is not a single accident, but the moment when the highway itself turns into a giant trap. At first, it seems that there is just a strange cluster of automobiles ahead. But a few seconds later, it becomes clear, this is not a traffic jam. This is a massive mess of cars, which one after another lost traction on the ice and began to collect each other in a chain reaction. In such footage, the horror stretches out in time. You do not see a single impact. You watch as the road itself methodically gathers more and more new cars. The feeling of hopelessness is especially strong here. Even if you have already understood the danger, someone from behind might not make it in time, and there is no space for salvation ahead anymore. And then you find yourself inside a system that you cannot stop alone. That is why such episodes work so strongly. The disaster here is not created by a single madman behind the wheel, but by a combination of conditions where one mistake in the organization of the road results in dozens of ruined automobiles and human lives. The semi-truck that demolished a bucket with a worker. A worker was servicing a traffic light, situated high up in the bucket of a special utility vehicle. Already in the first seconds, one can feel that the organization of traffic there leaves questions. Weak fencing, doubtful blocking of the lane, a feeling as if safety is held not on rules, but on hope. And that is exactly why the impact is perceived as something almost inevitable. A large semi-truck enters the frame and demolishes the extended structure practically without a chance for a soft outcome. The metal breaks, the bucket collapses, the person practically remains hanging in the air, only thanks to a safety harness. It is not only the moment of collision itself that scares here. The helpless after scares. Everyone nearby sees what is happening, but they cannot immediately lower the victim, because the mechanism is damaged. This is one of those episodes where the tension does not end after the impact. On the contrary, it only begins. An earthquake warning for which there are seconds. A car was driving along a mountain road. A beautiful landscape, a calm trip, almost a postcard. And suddenly short, alarming signals ring out. For a person not living in a seismic zone, this might sound like a regular electronic notification. But then it becomes clear that those were, perhaps, the most important seconds in the driver's life. The earth begins to move. Rocks start falling from above. The road ceases to be a road and turns into a corridor between landslides. All that remains for the person is to manage to reach a protective shelter before the mountain decides to end the argument with the car in its favor. Such scenes frighten with the feeling of a timer, not minutes, not even tens of seconds, almost nothing. And if ordinary accidents are often tied to human error, then here a person faces a force that is completely indifferent to how careful, law-abiding, or experienced you are. When the earth itself begins to move, the price of accustomed control drops sharply. The airplane that ended up too low. One of the most terrifying road recordings is the moment when a passenger airplane suddenly appears where it simply should not be. For the drivers on the bridge, it looks like an impossible scene. The airliner is flying so low that the brain at first refuses to accept the picture as reality. And then everything happens almost instantaneously. Touching the structure, an impact, a splash, wreckage, water, and in a few seconds, dozens of human fates turn into a tragedy that the whole world will later follow. But what makes this story especially powerful is what became known later. Errors in the crew's actions, lost seconds, incorrect decisions in a critical moment, and a terrible realization that came too late. At first, the viewer is struck by the very visual impossibility of the frame, and then the understanding finishes them off that the disaster was already unfolding inside the cockpit, even before the people on the road saw it. A child on a bicycle between two automobiles. Some footage strikes not with the number of victims, but with how thin the boundary between life and tragedy turns out to be. On the recording, it can be seen how, during a turn, one car clips another, and the latter goes into an uncontrollable spin. This alone is enough to call the situation serious. But at the worst moment, a child on a bicycle was riding towards them. Then, everything happens frighteningly fast. The automobile sweeps away the boy and literally pins him against a parked car. For a moment, it seems that this is one of those frames after which good news is no longer possible. It is exactly such episodes that make road compilations emotionally heavier than any loud chronicle. Because here before us is not just metal and trajectory, but a child's vulnerability caught between someone else's mistakes. When it later turns out that serious injuries were avoided, it is perceived almost as a miracle, a real, rare, and very fragile one. The street that, in seconds, turned into a survival zone. There are recordings next to which any word creepy sounds too small. A car with a dashcam was moving along an ordinary city street when the area ahead was covered by powerful explosions. This is no longer just a road horror. This is the invasion of war into everyday life. People run through smoke, dust, debris, and screams. The space where there should be houses, entrances, windows, and someone else's ordinary life, in seconds, turns into a place where the only meaning is to manage to survive. It is difficult to perceive such footage as content because they are too real. There is no detective intrigue here, no beautiful dramaturgy. There's only a moment when the civilized shell of reality is torn off, and the camera, captures a pure human disaster. Within such a compilation, this kind of episode is especially important because it sharply changes the scale of the entire video. Before this, we saw personal dramas on the road. But here before us is already a calamity, in which the DAshcam accidentally becomes a witness to a story more terrifying than any traffic accident. And finally, Level 3, stories that will be remembered by you forever. The child who fell out of a car directly onto the highway. Even in very heavy road compilations, there is footage from which everything inside compresses not because of cruelty, but because of defenselessness. On a busy road, a small child suddenly falls out of an automobile. The car in front continues to drive further. The driver does not even realize that he has just lost a passenger. And behind them, a stream of traffic is already moving, where any next automobile could become fatal. The child remains in the middle of the road at an age when he is not even capable of fully understanding what happened. Such scenes are almost impossible to watch calmly. There is no reckless driver here, no malicious intent, no usual antagonist. There is only monstrous human negligence and almost unbelievable luck, thanks to which everything did not end irreparably. When a moment later a relative appears, who only now realizes the scale of what happened, the viewer exhales as if they themselves had been standing on this highway the entire time. The fugitive who calmly talked to the police. This story hooks you not with speed, but with absurd irony. A police officer notices a man near the tracks and begins a routine check. The conversation goes calmly, almost amiably. The man answers without obvious panic, looks relaxed, and does not particularly give himself away with anything. But at this moment, law enforcement officers are exactly looking for an escaped prisoner, and the person with whom the officer is conversing face to face turns out to be exactly him. The most powerful detail here is a tiny slip of the tongue in the name, which the viewer notices, but the police officer does not. And exactly at this moment, the tension rises almost to a detective level. You already understand who is in front of him, but you cannot change anything. In the end, the criminal walks away literally after an almost friendly chat. And this is one of the stickiest types of anxiety, when danger does not look like danger. It looks like a polite man who confidently lies without raising his voice. The fuel truck that turned the highway into fire. A heavy truck with tanker trailers was moving along the highway and suddenly began to shift strangely between the lanes. The drivers nearby at first simply became alert and reduced their speed, a decision that later saved the life of more than one person. And then, the fuel truck sharply veered across several rows and struck the divider. After this, exactly what any driver who finds himself next to such a transport fears happened. A flash, fire, an instantaneous transformation of the highway into a blazing corridor. Fire in such scenes always scares especially strongly because it erases the sense of time. After the impact, there is no longer a normal sequence of actions. There is only an instinct to get out, to run away, not to suffocate, not to be trapped. The truck without brakes. On a busy highway, the driver of a truck suddenly realizes that his brakes no longer work. This is one of the most terrifying scenarios behind the wheel. You are still moving, you still see the flow around you, you still understand how bad everything is, but the main tool of control has practically disappeared for you. Next begins a desperate attempt to guide the multi-ton machine between other automobiles with minimal damage. And even if a person tries to save as many other people's lives as possible, the very mass of the machinery works against him. In the end, collisions cannot be avoided, and the recording turns into a chronicle of an almost uncontrollable force that no longer obeys a human. The last ride for the female taxi driver. A mother of 4 children moonlighted driving a taxi to feed her family. Another passenger got into the car, and the first seconds did not look unusual. She tried to maintain a conversation. He answered dryly, looked around nervously, fidgeted in the back seat. And then the trip ended, but only according to the route, not in reality. The passenger pulled out a weapon and ordered her to drive further. At this moment, the recording becomes especially heavy, because in the woman's voice one can hear that very instant when a person still hopes that everything happening is someone's ridiculous mistake or a terrible joke. But it is not a joke. He forced her to continue the journey, gained access to her phone, to her money, to her life, and in the end, took this life away. Such stories are frightening because of how routinely evil enters the frame. Not in a mask, not to music, not as a caricatured villain, but as an ordinary passenger who simply sits down in the back seat. Firefighters caught in a fire trap. Firefighting equipment was heading straight toward a massive forest fire. The smoke was becoming thicker, visibility was dropping, the air itself already looked threatening. But the real panic began later, when the vehicle stopped, and a wall of fire suddenly rose from the billows of smoke. Not just tongues of flame on the edges, a full-fledged fire front that is moving toward people who are used to saving others. Usually, firefighters are the ones who arrive to pull you out. But here, they themselves need to be saved. They are boxed in, the vehicles collide, the flames envelop the cars, and all they can do is hope that the hull and the sprinkler systems will hold out. This is not just a scary picture. This is a concentrate of helplessness within a profession that we are accustomed to associating with control over chaos. The driverless automobile that did not see the person in time. The story with the test driverless automobile frightens in a special way, because here, two dangerous types of overconfidence collide: technological and human. The car was driving in autopilot mode, but an operator was still supposed to be behind the wheel, watching the road and ready to intervene at any moment. The problem is that the operator got distracted and stopped performing the only task for which he was in the cabin at all. And at this time, a woman was crossing the road with a bicycle. When the system and the human finally detected her as a problem, there was no time left. And this is exactly the cold horror of the episode. There is no drunk, reckless driver here, no chase, no beast that flew out of the forest. There is a technology that promises safety, and a human who was supposed to be the last barrier, but did not become one. As a result, the recording turns not just into a chronicle of a tragedy, but into a warning about the future, where automation does not cancel responsibility, but sometimes makes the price of a mistake even more terrifying. The most disturbing thing in these videos is not the horror itself, but its closeness to everyday life. In practically every episode, people were doing what we all do: going about their business, returning home, working, transporting passengers, making decisions on the go. But the camera proved a simple and unpleasant thing. Between an ordinary day and a story that will later be shown to millions, there sometimes lies just 1 second. Write in the comments everything you think about this, and subscribe to the TopFacts channel for compilations of the most incredible facts and videos from all over the internet. Thank you for watching, and right now watch our previous episodes, which have already appeared on your screen.